Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. Now, it's often said that if you like your sausages, you should never watch one being made. But you'll want to watch today's guest because he's an absolute banger. He's one of Britain's top sausage makers and food producers. He is the black farmer himself, Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones. And let me tell you, there are absolutely no porkies in this story today. Well, Wilfred, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Introduction. What an introduction.
Is it the best you've had?
I hope it didn't take you too long to write that, but thank you very much for those very kind words of yours.
Well, listen, it's great to have you on the business. We'll talk about the business in a moment,
yes.
But you are in the throes of launching a new book, Jeopardy.
That's right.
And how you should embrace danger. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's something that I've wanted to write for a very, very long time, because when you hear about my story a bit later on, you will see that it's been full of jeopardy. And when I go around the country talking to a lot of potential entrepreneurs, one of the things that I tend to find is that they're desperate for certainty. Now, the thing that you have to come to terms with in life is this, is that if you want to achieve anything, whether that's from a personal basis or in business, you have to make a friend of uncertainty.
Right.
And if you're not prepared to make a friend of uncertainty, you will never, ever achieve your dreams. And this book tells you how to make a friend of uncertainty.
Should you seek it out, that danger, that side?
Absolutely, most definitely. You've got to sort of seek it out.
And if you were to sort of characterise what that turns you into, why that makes you more match fit to face this uncertain world, what do you get from it?
Well, I tell you, everybody in their lives would have experienced uncertainty. And there's one moment in our lives when everybody will be able to identify with it straight away. And that is when you fall in love. Do you remember that feeling? That feeling of anxiety, of not knowing what's going to happen next or what's around the corner. And all you have to rely on is your gut, your instinct and your passion. Those are all the qualities you need to achieve success.
Remember your romantic success, and that's going to make you a great entrepreneur.
Remember the feeling. Remember that feeling. And so the question you have to ask yourself in life is that how often do you get that feeling? Do you do enough that makes you slightly a bit wary, that makes you slightly a bit frightened? You don't want to be too frightened because you want to do it, but that feeling you've got to be always testing if it's there.
Now, I've interviewed you before. I interviewed you in Liverpool, and I remember one of the things you said, it's always stuck in my mind, that all great stories start with jeopardy. I mean, is jeopardy behind every great entrepreneurial story? Is that an essential ingredient to successful
Jeopardy
firms?
is an essential ingredient to be a successful company, to be a successful person. That is what brings about change. I mean, whether that's discovering the Americas, you just think of all the great, whether that's going to the moon, whether you think about all the great things on a sort of international or even a personal basis, it involves
You've got
jeopardy.
to have that audacious goal.
And and the tragedy is this. We live in a society where people are made to be frightened of jeopardy. It seems to be the great horror. Keep away from it.
Why is that? Why?
Well, if you have a society, in order to create order, you have to, in a sense, make people slightly frightened. You know, there's a consequence. And so, in a sense, most people only experience jeopardy from going to the cinema or from the computer games they have. When I said, actually, forget all of that and try and actually do something sort of physical. So, unfortunately, if you're in a modern society, it makes people aware of if you go to India, for example, places where they've got uncertainty all around them, they're not intimidated or frightened by things like uncertainty.
Okay, right. Let's bring jeopardy into a very real sense. Tell us about the business. Tell us about the black farmer. Just give us a sense for the audience in terms of where is the business today. Give us a sense of
where it is.
What it is.
So when I first started off the brand, my goal was to try and bring something different, to actually go against the stereotype, to really try and cut the status quo. And at the time, I sort of recognized there wasn't a lot of, there wasn't any black farmers around at all. So I decided, A, I was going to get a farm, and B, I was going to launch a brand. And I wanted it to be a quintessentially British brand, and I wanted to sort of demonstrate that Britishness is not this traditional old-fashioned sort of you know, ladies in Edwardian dresses and things like that.
There's a more contemporary edge.
More contemporary. And so what's really interesting is that I can remember doing some research at the time to say, should I call this brand the Black Farmer? And all the research came back and said no, because it might offend people. And it taught me a big lesson. And the lesson is this: research will tell you what people are thinking today, but it won't tell you what people are thinking tomorrow.
Right.
That's where you need vision.
So it's a bad message for the pollsters. But there was something about edge, right? I mean, you were inspired by Virgin, another brand that people didn't like saying at the time.
Well, yes. I mean, I think if you look at those brands, and any great brand started off by breaking the rules. That is the first thing you have to come to terms with. If you want to do something different, you're going to break the rules. And I like to say to people, work out, what are you? Are you a beer or a belonger? And
Right.
so it's beers who bring change regardless of the consequences it may have to other people who want to belong. If you want to belong, you cannot be entrepreneurial. You can't really go out and do things differently.
But I mean, that philosophy, I mean, that got you getting your customers to lobby the supermarkets to get you in. I mean, you did some quite sort of controversial things, I guess, to get the brand up and airborne.
Exactly. And so you can't do that if you're trying to please people. And I think that all these big institutions, they're standing up there high and mighty, knowing that everybody wants to get their attention and everybody sort of kowtows them. And I says, well, don't. Go along and be yourself and do something different.
But what does a supermarket buyer make of you and Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones comes thundering through the door?
They think I'm nuts. They think I'm nuts. I mean, the reality is this, is that, you know, people are always looking for something different. And it's a sort of, it's a perilous edge, because they're looking for you to fail. And, you know, they'll be able to say, well, you know, we told you so. Or if you're successful, you know, everybody then sort of worships
presumably
it.
they're not buying Jeopardy. They want to buy the fact that the sausages work, and if I'm going to buy the chicken and the other things that you're selling, that's going to work too, right?
No, the most important thing to remember if you're selling anything, whether that's food or whether it's clothing, is the power is with the consumer. And so therefore, they don't give monkeys about people like me. It's about the customer. So what you need to do as a supplier or anybody being entrepreneur, you say you've got to get the customer on side. That is your secret weapon.
So give us a couple of tips on how you've done that. How does the Black Farmer fan base get activated?
Well, the point is this, is that, you know, I encourage my customers to talk to the supermarkets directly, to write to the people who are in charge. Me writing them will make no difference. Encourage them to communicate how they feel, and they will listen. Because, you know, these big companies are in a perilous position. You could just see how things could turn if they don't listen to their customer. If you think about this big supermarket war going out there at the moment, and you've got the traditional retailers, you know, running to catch up with the discounters, because the discounters came along at the right time, listening to what consumers wanted and offering them.
But you've never shied away from stoking up controversy, whether it's about antibiotics in animals, in terms of those then being sold on the supermarket shelf, through to being an early adopter of things like gluten-free.
Yeah, and I think
you've always been at the forefront of the debate, right? That's
what
an
it is.
part.
And I think one of the things that you'll find, like, you know, the way the food industry works is this: it's all about high volume, low margins, and the only way that works is to reduce choice. So if somebody comes along with something that is totally different, it's in these big retailers' interest to crush it. But again, if you get the consumers on side and you say, look, you know, this is much better than what's on offer, you then stand a chance.
So you've got to break through. You've got to prove you've got the consumer fan base, you've got the brand, and you've got the determination to show you've got a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people think that you've got to toe the line, but I've discovered in life, if you're mouthy and you're prepared to put yourself out there, and you know what you're talking about, and you've got the experience, people will listen to what you've got to say.
So advise a food entrepreneur now, those entrepreneurs that are desperate to get the sort of attention from the major retailers that you managed to get. What should they do?
The biggest mistake everybody makes is they try to be something that they're not. What I say to people is this: the only thing that you have as a point of difference is you. And that is what you've got to sell, is you. So you know, people all too often remove products or things they're developing away from themselves, their personality and what they sort of stand for. And I say, that is what you've got to put into the product.
And very quickly, because we're racing to the break, but doubt. How do you confront doubt? How do you confront that feeling of, I've really messed this up? Perhaps I've gone that one step too far. I might have messed my own business up. What's the key to actually keeping true to yourself?
But the truth to success is that you have to have failure. And if you don't have failure, you are doing something wrong. You're not really pushing yourself far enough.
Right.
So doubt comes with failure.
Right, so doubt comes with failure. I'll be doing something wrong if I didn't go to the break, because we're going to have to just do that right now. And when we come back, we'll talk about the man, the myth and the mission. More from the Black Farmer coming right up. Stay tuned. Welcome back. My guest today is Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones. Now, Wilfred, I'm going to take you into my personal time machine. I'm going to take you back to the 11-year-old Wilfred.
Okay.
You're in an allotment in Birmingham and you're dreaming big about the world that's going to change. You've come over from Jamaica to the UK age 3. Pick up the story for us.
Okay,
in terms
so
of the dream.
Brought up in Small Heath in Birmingham from a family of 11. You can imagine very, very cramped. And my job as oldest boy was to look after my father's allotment. Loved being in that allotment. And so I made a promise to myself at the age of 11 that one day I would like to own my own farm. Didn't know how to do it, but that's what I aimed at. I then went on to be in the catering industry. In those days, it wasn't very glamorous at all. Anybody who was a failure at everything ended up in catering. I did that for a number of years, but I knew I wasn't getting anywhere with that. So I decided out of the blue that I would like to go and work for the BBC as a producer-director. So you can imagine all of
another station.
Well, you can imagine all of my families and friends thought I was nuts because I left school without any qualifications. I'm dyslexic, from totally the different parts of the world, but it took me 2.5 years of absolute determination to get my first break. And I always say to people, look, the key thing in life is find your guardian angel, someone who will go out of their way to give you a break.
So who was your guardian angel?
It was a guy, well, I had several of them actually. The first one was a guy called Jock Gallagher, who was a station head at BBC Pebble Mill, and another guy, you'd probably recognise his name, Peter Bazalgette, who is a big name. He was, those guardian angels would sort of protect me from all these other people who would sack me.
They got you in?
They got me in and then protected me as well. That's the key thing. Because when you're joining any establishment and you don't fit in, you know, you're going to need people to protect you.
Well, I mean, you did exactly that in the army, didn't you? You were in the paratroopers.
I got kicked out of the army because
dishonourable discharge. Well,
the reason why is that, you know, I joined the army because I wanted to get away from home. And there's one thing you do not do, is that you do not join the army as a black guy with an attitude, because if you join the army as a black guy with an attitude, you're going to get your head kicked in. I got my head kicked in and then chucked out, which was the best thing for me because, you know, you can't be in the army and have an entrepreneurial spirit. The two things don't go together because it's all about following orders and doing as you're told. And everything about my personality says I'm not that type of person.
And then you've taken on another traditional institution by becoming a Conservative candidate. You stood to be an MP.
Well, yes, but again, it's all about trying to bring some change rather than, you know, thinking that conservatism means you have to belong to a certain stereotype. I believe, for example, that a lot of people from my generation and from the Caribbean were very conservative. I mean, I think
one
of the...
entrepreneurial or...
Well, yes, that is one of the things that frustrates me, is that what people don't recognise is that all of those people who came to this country in the 50s, you know, because I'm one of those Windrush children, actually were very entrepreneurial, to leave everything that you knew behind to better your life, not just for you, but for your children, is very, very entrepreneurial. And I like to remind people about that time and time and time again.
OK, now, let's move on. I mean, a big battle that you've faced has been cancer.
Oh, yes. I mean,
life-threatening
I've been through many things in my life, you know, and one of the big battles was cancer. I mean, in my case, I had leukemia, and that leukemia meant I had to have a stem cell transplant. So if you look at my skin at the moment, you would remember me 10 years ago looking totally different to how I did now. But this is one of the consequences of the treatment that I had to have.
And what does something like that teach you about yourself, about the person you are?
Well, that is one of the reasons why I wrote the book. Because what happens is that when you know you're going to die, and I was, this is no exaggeration, you were going to die, it actually puts things into perspective. And so what you're able to do is that you're able to sort of push away the white noise of living. And you'd be amazed how much white noise there is around you. And then you focus on the things that matter. Very few things matter.
So what was the white noise for you? What was the distractions that were affecting your life?
Just everyday life, really. Everyday life. Whether that's, on your mobile, whether that's TV, whether that's just everyday life. When you strip it down and you work out what actually really matters. For me, it's what you leave behind for the people that you love.
So legacy is your thing.
Legacy is my thing. It's about the greatest gift you could give anybody is, love and inspire them to be able to go on their journey in life.
So is that legacy about family, or is it a wider community?
Much wider. What I like doing is telling my story. And because from where I'm from, there are a lot of people on society's dustbin heap who are forgotten. No one knows what to sort of do with them. And by telling my story, if it helps and encourages people who are in exactly that same position, that they are able to change their lives too, I would have done some good.
And I remember, I was one of the people that came across you through the documentary about the inner city kids that you took onto the farm. Today you are investing in young startups through the hatchery. I mean, that sense of activism, that sense of campaigning, I mean, that runs right the way through you. Is that what you should be in life, do you think?
But the reason why it does is because I still remember the pain of being one of life's losers, where you have no friend, you have nowhere to go, where no one to sort of help you. And that's why these guardian angels, these helping hands really stick out, because, if I had to ever apply for a job conventionally, I would never have got it because I wouldn't have gone past first post. And I think that as a society, rather than have all these sophisticated systems to decide whether somebody is suitable for a particular job, we have to go back for trusting people to trust their gut.
But on this thing about I felt like a loser, I mean, in terms of what propels you forward, interestingly, Chris Evans, when he resigned from Radio 2, he said he's a mountaineer. He can't just look at mountains, he's got to get out there and climb them. Presumably there's something that's firing him on. What keeps you firing on? Do you feel like you've made it now, or do you still think you've got things to prove?
I don't feel that I've made it now. I mean, what inspires me is to change. If there's one thing I can't tolerate is the status quo. I can't tolerate the fact that mediocrity as a rule rules
What's
the day.
What's the Devon status quo and the Cornwall status quo, mate? I mean, do you have good relationships with the Lords of the Manor?
But again, it's all about bringing change. I mean, it's a shame your programme isn't longer, because I could talk about the sort of things I would like to do.
I've still got about 5 questions. Come on.
To radicalise the whole of rural Britain. One of my big frustrations is that there isn't a stronger connection between rural and urban. And there's things that can be done about it. But you see, what tends to happen is that the people with the power don't want to let it go unless people like me come and start breaking down the walls.
So let's talk about people with power. Let's talk about Brexit. I mean, your book Jeopardy could have been tailor-made for this particular chapter in the nation's story. Are we making a success of it?
Well, this is my view. I am so frustrated with this discussion about Brexit. And it's all about the fearmongers. I talk a lot about the fearmongers in my book. There's fearmongers of what could happen. Nobody knows what the future is going to be. No one knows. And what we have to come to terms with is that Brexit means that things will change. But because
so it doesn't just mean Brexit means Brexit.
But this is really important. Because things are going to change, change doesn't necessarily equal bad. It just means change. During the war, we faced a situation of change. People didn't suddenly go into this sort of, my God, the world's coming to an end. People had to adapt to change.
But when you look at this, I mean, we've got a lot of change on our toes at the moment, whether it's political change, technological change. Do you think that for the entrepreneur, the person that's thinking about going into business. Is this a good time to do it, do you think?
Yeah, look, there's never a good or a bad time to do anything. And it's, it's for all these commentators who, want to try and sort of create a story out of something. There's never a good time and there's never a bad time. All you have to do is have your mindset adjusted. That change always happens. There will be things that will come so left field that no one would ever have predicted it. But if you've got a mindset that you could adjust according to what change comes along, you'll be fine regardless of what happens.
Okay, so you've got to get comfortable with change.
Get comfortable with change. Get comfortable with uncertainty.
Could you ever get comfortable with politics again? Have we seen the end of your political aspirations, or do you think could we see you on the green benches?
Well, you see,
Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones MP?
I mean, I think the thing is, I believe actually that politics are going to change fundamentally.
Come on, answer the question.
I am going to answer the question. I don't think you need MPs anymore.
Oh, right.
Absolutely, I don't think you need it. I think that...
They'll be delighted.
If you go back to the age when actually you had MPs because you had to have people from different parts of the country to go and represent your interests. Now, with the sophisticated with all the digitisation and information, actually, why do you need someone to represent
digital democracy? Very quickly, if I could take you right back to the start. I mean, you've had this amazing life, so many twists and turns. Would you do any of it differently again?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't do it any differently. And, even having the cancer, because one of the greatest things you learn in life are the things, adversity is a great teacher, and it teaches you a lot about your own self.
Wilfred, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the Capital Conversation. And that's all we have time for this week. And a big thank you to my guest, Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones, an entrepreneur who's built his career on beating the odds at every turn. It's a story of true grit, turning hard knocks into transformational opportunities, of running with risk and turning it into triumph. From the Caribbean to Cornwall, from comms to the Conservative Party, and from the army to an award-winning farmer who has fought illness and come out the other side. And if he has one message from his life experience, it's this: playing safe is about the most dangerous thing you'll ever do. I'll see you next time on the Capital Conversation.